Beginning in 1962, the mystery writer Donald Westlake, under the pseudonym Richard Stark, wrote a series of books about a professional armed robber named Parker. I discovered the books sometime in my 20s and went gaga for them. Parker was a cold, emotionless bastard, whose only identity was his armed robber's code of professionalism. He robbed banks, bonds, rare coin collections, you name it, Parker stole it. The conflict in most of the novels came from the fact that, usually, the other members of whatever crew he was working with weren't as professional as Parker.
Slow down! Stop this car! Stop this car!
And that's when Parker, the armed robber, could become Parker, the unstoppable killer. Parker may not have been burdened by the normal human emotions most of us have, but that shouldn't suggest he was cynical. In book after book, he kept expecting his criminal colleagues to be as professional as he was, and when they weren't, he was appalled. Some of the books featured Parker helping a former colleague out of a jam, or righting wrongs for a former colleague, or going after a greedy former colleague. Even though Parker wasn't a professional killer, he dealt in armed robbery and all that implies. He wasn't trigger-happy. That would be unprofessional. But he wasn't afraid to use his gun if need be. You always risk certain consequences when you carry a loaded firearm into any endeavor. And Parker was always willing to face those consequences. In Stark's first Parker book, The Hunter, our main character ties up and gags a female secretary in an office he's robbing and inadvertently ends up suffocating her to death. Well, that's unfortunate, especially for her. But them's the risks, and Parker never shied away from the risks inherent in his chosen profession. What makes both the character and the book so interesting is their insistence on the code of ethics involved in a criminal activity. It's as if, by insisting on a professional code of ethics, the characters can convince themselves that being a thief is a trade. The closest thing to a humanizing trait that Stark allows the character is Parker's genuine fondness, bordering on affection.
What are you looking at?
Your ugly face, you shit kicker.
For his only friend, a fellow thief named Cody.
Oh, world. Cody?
Cody appeared in the books every so often, and his presence is always welcome. When I first discovered Parker, what made the character so memorable was he served as an antidote to the horrible, homogeneous movies Hollywood was making in the 80s.
I told you I had a surprise for you.
After growing up in the anything-goes 70s, the 80s marked a play-it-safe decade, like that other horrible decade for Hollywood movies, the 50s. But the 80s were even worse. In the 50s, you could claim that it was a repressed society that imposed restrictions on Hollywood, their movies, and their artists.
You know, they say a woman's place is in the home, and I suppose as long as she's in the home, she might as well be in the kitchen.
But in the 80s, the restrictions Hollywood imposed on their own product were self-imposed. The harshest censorship is self-censorship. And it doesn't always come from the big bad studio either. Many filmmakers watered down their own vision right from the beginning. The idea that an American studio film of 1986 could have an opening scene like Pedro Almodóvar's Spanish film Matador, where a character masturbates to a montage of the goriest scenes in slasher films, was unthinkable. Even De Palma was drawn and quartered for his toothless porn satire Body Double, causing him to retreat to the silly mob comedy Wise Guys.
You're exactly what I'm looking for, dickface.
Hey, Frankie, the name's Dick Steen.
Make yourself available this afternoon, dickhead.
When it came to artists whose film work was of an uncompromising nature in the 80s, you had David Lynch, Paul Verhoeven, Abel Ferrara, Terry Gilliam, Brian De Palma sometimes, and David Cronenberg. And that's it.
We now return to a 1980s movie you remember fondly, but now feels excruciatingly slow.
All right, Stripes. Oh, this was hilarious.
Yeah, there were one-offs. John Carpenter's The Thing, William Friedkin's Cruising, Robert Harmon's The Hitcher, Catherine Bigelow's Near Dark, Michael Cimino's Year of the Dragon, Hal Ashby's 8 Million Ways to Die, Jim McBride's Breathless, Clive Barker's Hellraiser. But Hellraiser aside, these directors were usually punished for their perceived transgressions by the press, the public, and the industry.
Jesus. Wet.
I remember when I worked at my Manhattan Beach video store, Video Archives, and talked to the other employees about the types of movies I wanted to make and the things I wanted to do inside of those movies. And I would use the example of the opening of Almodóvar's Matador, and their response would be, "Quentin, they won't let you do that." To which I replied back, "Who the fuck are they to stop me? they can go fuck themselves. Now, I wasn't a professional filmmaker back then. I was a brash, know-it-all film geek. Yet, once I graduated to professional filmmaker, I never did let they stop me. Viewers can accept my work or reject it, deem it good, bad, or with indifference. But I've always approached my cinema with a fearlessness of the eventual outcome. A fearlessness that comes to me naturally. I mean, who cares, really? It's only a movie. But at the right age, mid-20s, and at the right time, the fucking 80s. The fearlessness demonstrated by Pedro Almodovar, led by example. As I watched my heroes, the American film mavericks of the 70s, knuckle under to a new way of doing business just to stay employed, Pedro's fearlessness made a mockery of their calculated compromises. My dreams of movies always included a comic reaction to unpleasantness, similar to the connection that Almodovar's films made between the unpleasant and the sensual.
Want me to stuff your cock while driving?
How old are you?
What?
Sitting in a Beverly Hills art house cinema, watching Pedro's vividly colorful, thrillingly provocative 35mm images flickering on a giant wall, demonstrating that there could be something sexy about violence. I was convinced there was a place for me and my violent reveries in the modern cinematheque. But the curse of 80s cinema wasn't that they wouldn't let you shoot somebody jerking off to Mario Bava's Blood and Black Lace. It was that the complex and complicated lead characters of the 70s were the characters that 80s cinema avoided completely. Complex characters aren't necessarily sympathetic. Interesting people aren't always likable. But in the Hollywood of the 80s, likability was everything. A novel could have a low-down son of a bitch at its center, as long as that low-down son of a bitch was an interesting character. But not a movie. Not in the 80s.
The fuck?
After the 70s, it seemed film went back to the restraints of the 50s. Back to when controversial novels and plays had to be drained of life, changed, or turned into morality plays. As happened with 9.5 Weeks, Less Than Zero, Bright Lights, Big City, First Blood, The Color Purple, White Palace, Stick, Miami Blues, and The Bonfire of the Vanities. Okay, what about Philip Kaufman's The Unbearable Lightness of Being? Its open sexuality more or less made it to the screen intact. That meant you can do that kind of thing, didn't it? Yeah, if you made it dull enough. The unbearable boredom of watching. And if you did make a movie about a fucking bastard, you could bet that fucking bastard would see the error of their ways and be redeemed in the last 20 minutes.
Doesn't surprise me. You look like a typical low-life character to me.
Like, for example, all of Bill Murray's characters. How does Murray in Stripes go from being an iconoclastic pain in the ass, who deserves to get beat up by Drill Sergeant Warren Oates, to rallying the troops?
That's the fact, Jack! That's the fact, Jack!
And masterminding a covert mission on foreign soil. And Stripes was one of the hip movies. Film critics always preferred Bill Murray to Chevy Chase.
Stripes is a real breakthrough for Bill Murray, who had a big hit called Meatballs that really didn't do justice to his talent a couple of years ago, but this one does. We move on now to a movie called Modern Problems, starring Chevy Chase. Modern Problems is a film that seems to have been made without being written first. Chevy Chase doesn't grow and change and suffer comically after he develops his strange power. He just floats through situations like a cut-rate nightclub magician.
Yet more often than not, Chase remained the same sarcastic, aloof asshole at the film's end he was at the beginning.
Yes! I like it.
Or at least, his conversion wasn't the whole point of the movie as it was in Scrooged and Groundhog Day. Admittedly, when you don't give a fuck about other people's feelings, it probably does wonders for your caustic wit. But I've always rejected the idea that Bill Murray's characters needed redemption. Yeah, maybe he charmed Andie MacDowell, but does anybody think a less sarcastic Bill Murray is a better Bill Murray?
What the fuck? No.
In Wall Street, it was so obvious that Gordon Gekko was going to have to go to jail at the end that it might as well been preordained by the Hays Code. The Hays Code was a set of moral guidelines that dictated American film production from the early 1930s to the late 1960s. With the movies Something Wild and Into the Night, was there any chance that Melanie Griffith and Michelle Pfeiffer wouldn't inexplicably return to the male hero? Of course not. That would have been a bummer ending, but it makes no sense why they'd return. Who cares? The movie's over. The people making movies didn't think audiences cared whether or not the happy endings they gave them made sense or not. And while I'd like to say those Hollywood professionals were wrong, I'm not sure they were. At Video Archives, I dealt closely with the movie-watching public, usually on a one-on-one basis.
Do you have that one with that guy who was in that movie that was out last year?
Much closer than any Hollywood executives. And for the most part, they didn't care how unrealistic or implausible the jerry-rigged climaxes they were spoon-fed were.
They never rent quality flicks. They always pick the most intellectually devoid movie on the racks.
They just didn't want the movie to end like a bummer. Just ask the makers of Demi Moore's version of the Scarlet Letter, aka the triumphant ending version. Or ask Demi Moore. Not many people have read the book.
I mean, if you want a happy ending, you should go see a Hollywood movie.
When the pursuing posse of local yokels fuck around and flip the on switch of one-man killing machine John J. Rambo in First Blood, instead of slaughtering them like he does in David Morrell's book, he just wounds them. Does that make the point of the book, that once the government turns a man into a killing machine for the purposes of warfare, keeping that machine turned off back home during peacetime isn't so easy? Irrelevant? Of course, but as Demi Moore would say.
She sounds pretty unbearable, but I haven't read the book.
The first three Parker books, The Hunter, The Man with the Getaway Face, and The Outfit, are drastically the best ones. Once it became next book, next score, they lost something. But even in the later Parker books I started but never finished, Parker was always true to Parker. The first three books in the series are connected. The first book, The Hunter, was made famous by John Boorman's cinematic adaptation Point Blank, with Lee Marvin becoming the first of many movie Parkers. The movie doesn't really follow the plot of the book that much, but they both get to the same place. Parker stalking, terrorizing, and murdering a bunch of high-powered mobsters who aren't used to this type of treatment over his share of a score they owe him, $46,000. By the end of the book, he's created such bloody havoc throughout the organized crime syndicate, or the Outfit as they call it in Stark's universe, that even Parker knows he must disappear. And his attempt to disappear is the plot of the second book, The Man with the Getaway Face, which has never been made into a movie. But there is a slight chance that a Spanish knockoff version of The Man with the Getaway Face was made in 1963 called Una cara para escapar, or translated to English, A Face to Escape. The only proof is this movie poster. You can find a link in the description for more information. In my opinion, the best movie Parker isn't from an adaptation of one of Stark's novels. It's Robert De Niro as armed robber Neil McCauley in Michael Mann's Heat. While it's not literally based on a Richard Stark novel, it's pretty fucking obvious McCauley is, at least inspired, if not outright based on Parker. His professionalism, his creed, his held-in-check emotions, even McCauley's motto,
Allow nothing to be in your life that you cannot walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you spot the heat around the corner.
sounds like some shit Parker would say. And the end, McCauley missing his window of opportunity of escape and staying in LA to get revenge for a respected colleague, is totally a Parker dilemma. However, if it had been a Stark book, Parker's professionalism would have led him to flee, because Parker knows there's nothing more important than not getting caught. Sticking to the code is how one maneuvers in this world without getting caught. Consequently, in 12 books, Parker never gets caught and never gets killed. At the end of Heat, McCauley gets shot by the law. I never liked the ending of Heat. Not just because I wanted to see De Niro get away, not just because I didn't want him to break his code, and not just because I didn't want Al Pacino's detective to win. But from the moment John Voight tells him he found the guy who killed Danny Trejo, you know how the movie's going to end. The close-up of De Niro driving, making up his mind. Incredible. But once he jerks the wheel, you know he's doomed. The by-rote moralistic functionality of the last 15 minutes compared to the 2 hours and 35 minutes that preceded it is a drag. Of the straight Parker adaptations, most people choose Boorman's Point Blank and consider Lee Marvin the living embodiment of Parker. I've never understood the reputation that baby boomer critics assigned Boorman's non-entity crime film. Yes, it has a dazzling, for its time, opening 10 minutes. But the truth is, it seemed more dazzling when I was 26 than it does now. Shh. Even in terms of ruthless Lee Marvin gangster film openings, it can't hold a flickering birthday candle next to Don Siegel's opening for The Killers. What's effective about Boorman's opening is the way it builds and keeps building. The way the forward momentum of Marvin's shoes tap out a rhythm on the floor brings to mind both the sizzle of a dynamite fuse and the screech before a car collision. And the sequence pays off when Marvin bursts through Angie Dickinson's door, blasting his pistol. But that's by far the best filmmaking in the movie. After the opening 10 minutes, except for the violent fight in the discotheque, it never hums again.
Shut up.
After the show-off opening, Point Blank settles down into 60s television. It's pretty much indistinguishable from a Mannix episode of the same era. Actually, Mannix star Mike Connors wouldn't have been a bad Parker. In fact, when I read The Hunter, I see somebody like Connors. I disagree that Lee Marvin is the quintessential Parker. I don't even think it's a good performance.
Well, I'll be damned. Most of us are.
Marvin was one of the most exciting actors of the 50s.
So here you stay, here you hold. Why will I?
Are you all through talking?
How I hate you.
And in The Professionals and The Dirty Dozen, he modulated that excitement into stardom.
Otto! I wouldn't do that.
Look, you little bastard, either you march, or I'll beat your brains out. Understand?
But starting with Point Blank, Marvin went from his greatest lead performance in The Dirty Dozen to acting like a leafless tree. And for the whole rest of his acting career, he swung wildly from these boring, iconic death mask non-performances.
It's late, Matt. There's no sign of anybody.
Yeah, and we don't even know who we're looking for.
To overplayed comedic buffoonery. But in the 70s, he practically stopped speaking. And then when he did, in Frankenheimer's The Iceman Cometh,
Unveil it, boys!
he didn't have it anymore.
I'm gonna help you, Jimmy, because you've always been damn kind to me.
But back to Point Blank. When compared to other Stark adaptions, like the abysmal Jim Brown one, The Split, not Brown's fault. The practically comedic Point Blank remake, Payback with Mel Gibson.
Man, that's just mean. That's mean, man.
You people aren't listening.
And Goddard's non-adaptation, Made in USA, which wastes Stark's book, the audience's time, and a lot of Kodak film stock. Boorman's movie is at least an honorable effort. My nomination for Best Richard Stark Novel Adaptation, by far, is John Flynn's The Outfit, starring Robert Duvall as Macklin Parker, Karen Black as Bet, in the Angie Dickinson role from Point Blank, and a perfect Joe Don Baker as Cody. If you like Point Blank,
I love it.
Fair enough. Then The Outfit is its de facto sequel. The events in the book, The Hunter and Boorman's movie, is what leads the syndicate to target both Parker and Cody, and then leads Duvall and Baker to execute a full frontal assault against The Outfit. Flynn, forced to start from scratch, has Duvall's Macklin finishing up a prison sentence for getting picked up by the cops in a bar during a vice raid for carrying a hot weapon. As he gets out, his brother is assassinated by two mob triggermen in a real cool opening that just screams 70s cinema. Then two triggermen, familiar ugly-faced Tom Reese, who would have been a great post-plastic surgery Parker, disguised as quail hunters, show up at the woodsy breakfast diner that Cody, Joe Don Baker, runs when he's not doing a score.
Breakfast?
Coffee.
How about you? Breakfast? No, just coffee.
Where's Cody?
Out back.
However, they picked the wrong time.
I'm Cody.
Because the local sheriff, who has no idea about Cody's double life, is in the joint having his morning coffee.
Want to know about guns? You ask Bob Caswell there.
It's the sheriff.
But now Cody knows a couple of out-of-town torpedoes are on his trail.
That's the truth.
Macklin Parker, Duvall, is picked up from prison by his old lady, Bet, Karen Black, who sets him up for a hit at a local hotel.
I kept 18 for you. Like you said.
She's forced into this betrayal after she endures a torture session conducted by the Outfit, where they burned a cigarette up and down her arm. We later find out it was none other than Timothy Carey who used her arm as an ashtray.
Shouldn't use a girl's arm for an ashtray.
Back at the hotel, she informs Macklin in time for him to ambush the gunman. Duvall tortures him for information, learning why the outfit is targeting him.
Come on, come on. We haven't got much time.
I got glass in my face.
Earl, don't hurt him anymore.
You try to kill me. Why shouldn't I hurt you?
Macklin and Cody figure the best defense is a strong offense. Instead of running away from the mob, they run at them. With Black operating as their getaway driver, Duvall and Baker start robbing outfit-fronted operations. Not used to being fucked with, almost every robbery starts with somebody screaming,
You know who runs this place?
I don't give a rat's ass if your mother runs it. Get it out.
A big part of the movie's enjoyment stems from the mob associates' shock at the brutal treatment they receive at the hands of Duvall and Baker. But there's more to our hero's plan than just revenge for Duvall's brother and a mad crime spree. Both Macklin and Cody figure if they can cause enough trouble and hurt the syndicate where they're most sensitive, in the pocketbook. And since Mailer fancies himself a businessman, maybe they can broker a deal.
Must be tough running a big business.
Yep. How do you want the 250?
Small bills, used, hundreds or less. Delivery in a neutral place.
You know why I'm paying you.
I'm aggravation.
Small aggravation, Macklin. On a good day, we take in 250 by noon.
That should make it easy for you.
Well, naturally, that doesn't work.
Set up!
We got a problem. No. No, you got a problem.
So the movie ends with Duvall and Baker doing an all-out assault on Ryan's home compound.
Are you gonna kill me?
No yet.
And it's one of the more satisfying sequences of that type I've ever seen. Far better than the similar action climax in Michael Mann's Thief.
I am the last guy in the world that you want to fuck with.
While it's not as amazing or as violent as the whorehouse pump-action shotgun shootout in John Flynn's next film, Rolling Thunder, it's still cool and exciting. And the scene between Duvall and Baker on the stairs is the epitome of poignant masculinity.
You got a cigarette? I thought you was quitting.
Yeah. You ain't quit all of a sudden. You gotta taper off.
With the picture's final freeze-frame capper displaying a self-mocking tone that ends the whole film on a hearty macho guffaw. In a 1981 cover story for the magazine American Film, the writer described him as a hard-boiled Olivier. Not a bad description of Duvall's performance in this movie. In the Santa Clarita, California newspaper The Signal, film critic Philip Lanier wrote about Duvall as Macklin. Earl is one of the most interesting gangster figures to screen in a while. He is intelligent, and his brutality is as calculated as it is unsympathetic. To him, robbing and killing is just a 9-to-5 job, which he has to take home with him too. Duvall's quiet determination brings across a character who appears to be a desperate man by choice. It's a mysterious kind of masculinity that only he seems to possess. Macklin may be Stark's Parker, but both Flynn and Duvall open up the character. Macklin definitely has more of a sense of humor than Parker. In the movie, Duvall laughs every once in a while. But it's Macklin's affection for Cody that separates him from the literary Parker. The Parker of the books has affection for Cody as well. But Duvall's masterful performance conveys it stronger without abandoning that turtle shell he uses as a face.
I don't know. What do you think, Cody?
Whatever you say, Amos.
And he and Baker make a marvelous team.
Just a safety check. I'll have to inspect the vehicle.
It's a hit.
While I doubt any actor could be the definitive Parker, Joe Don Baker is absolutely the perfect embodiment of Cody. Joe Don has always been one of my favorite screen actors, but for me, it's his performance in this film that's my personal favorite.
Well, this is the office, all right. Well, here, take a look for yourself.
As I pointed out earlier, Point Blank has that canned quality of 60s television. Marvin aside, it even has a television cast. The whole supporting cast could have been the guest star lineup of an episode of Cannon.
Somebody had my wife and child killed, and somebody's gonna go down for it. You could have done without a girl for one night.
What made you change your mind?
It's a woman's privilege.
Jerry, keep your eyes on the road.
Brewster's next.
We're all a bunch of criminals.
John Vernon in the 60s and early 70s was constantly playing the heavy on episodic TV. And while I like Vernon, it was after the Outlaw Josey Wales and Animal House that I started liking him a lot more.
There's another old saying, Senator. Don't piss down my back and tell me it's raining.
But back in 1967, Vernon's part in Point Blank was too big for him. He couldn't hold his own with even a low-wattage Lee Marvin.
Put a sock in it, boy, or else you'll be out of here like shit through a goose.
Carroll O'Connor, before he settled into his role as TV icon Archie Bunker, was all forced comedic bluster.
Kind of leaves you in a spot, though. You killed the man who's supposed to pay you.
Who pays me?
I can't hear you.
A phony powerhouse, he played everything comedic because he wasn't a strong enough actor to play it dramatic.
I'll wait for Fairfax. He'll pay me.
All right. And if he doesn't, you can kill him, too.
But his ownership of the Archie Bunker role led him to do much deeper work later on.
You're a very bad man, Walker, a very destructive man. Why do you run around doing things like this? What do you want?
I want my money.
But in Point Blank, even giving a non-performance, Marvin thoroughly dominates Windbag O'Connor.
Will you stifle yourself?
And then there's fish-faced Lloyd Bochner.
What do you want? I want my money.
The type of tight-lipped stiff who regularly appeared on Quinn Martin-produced TV shows.
Quinn Martin, production.
Any movie that casts Lloyd fucking Bochner has serious casting issues. But by contrast, the supporting cast of The Outfit is filled with one terrific actor's face after another. Timothy Carey, Richard Jekyll, Cherie North, Marie Windsor, Jane Greer, Henry Jones, Bill McKinney.
You know, the only reason I took a part in this movie is because someone said that you were tight with Quentin Tarantino.
I considered doing an adaptation of the book in the late 90s with Robert De Niro as Parker, Harvey Keitel as Cody, and Pam Grier as Bet. And just writing that now makes me wish I would have done it.
Why can't you just fucking do it?
The Outfit was one of the last films made under the tenure of MGM studio head James Aubrey, aka the Smiling Cobra. And the studio head honcho instituted a new release pattern for his remaining pictures. Aubrey was pissed off at the way the New York and Los Angeles critics had treated his slate of MGM films, so he began opening new MGM movies regionally first. It took The Outfit an entire year to make the rounds through the United States. Starting off in October 1973 in Chicago and Baltimore, and not opening in California, its last stop, till a year later, in October 1974. The first press clippings, aside from casting announcements, to appear about Flynn's film were almost all from fat hack James Bacon, who wrote in his syndicated column on October 23, 1973, "Saw The Outfit the other night at a cast and crew preview, and it's The Godfather of 1973. Wow, pretty impressive, huh?" But then ask yourself, what was James Bacon doing at a cast and crew preview? Because Bacon had a small cameo in the movie, and that was sort of the deal back then. If you stuck James Bacon's fat ass somewhere in your movie, you could guarantee a few positive notices in his column.
Look at you. You're fat.
Eat pretty well, right?
But the less biased critics across the country were in a three-way split between declaring the film a routine crime picture, a slightly above routine crime picture, or a drastically below routine crime picture. Vincent Canby of the New York Times wrote, "The Outfit is not really a bad movie. It doesn't fail in an attempt to do something beyond its means. It doesn't attempt to do anything except pass the time, which simply isn't good enough when most of us have access to television." Greg Swem of the Courier-Journal obviously enjoyed the movie, but ultimately concluded, "It's well written and well directed by John Flynn, but the script and direction are fragmented. The film as a whole doesn't have any great attraction." But Gary Arnold of the Washington Post declared it a lugubrious derivative thriller. This sounds like the outline for a fairly tense little crime exercise, but Flynn has a flat, dawdling way of spinning a yarn, so the essential grubbiness and brutality of the conception aren't leavened with much flair or excitement. Gene Miller of the San Francisco Examiner referred to Flynn's work as dismal direction, and the film itself as disastrous. But Roger Ebert, in his Chicago Sun-Times review in October of 1973, gave the film 3.5 stars out of 4, and wrote, "The Outfit is a class action picture, very well directed and acted, about a gangster's revenge on the mob death of his brother. An outline of the plot would make it sound pretty routine, but what makes the picture superior is its richness of detail." Then Ebert went on to clarify, "We don't care much about what happens. The same things are always happening in action movies. And when you've seen one car burst into flames, you've seen them all. But the people in this movie are uncommonly interesting." Then a full year later, in October 1974, in the Los Angeles Times, Charles Champlin concluded his positive review with the summation, "There is always a particular pleasure in watching a movie which is in command of itself all the way, an exercise in professionalism. And The Outfit offers that kind of satisfaction as the bonus beyond the surprises, the suspense, and the vivid portrayals." I first saw The Outfit when it played in Tennessee in March of 1974, under the title The Good Guys Always Win. Actually, if you've seen the movie, not a bad title. Due to Joe Don Baker's incredible popularity in that state because of Walking Tall, it was Baker and the Buford-Pusser connection that was emphasized.
It's the picture your neighbors are talking about.
And 8 months later, when it finally opened in Los Angeles under its original title of The Outfit, I saw it again at the United Artists Cinema in Marina del Rey on a double feature with Sam Peckinpah's The Getaway. Talk about an action-packed PG-rated double feature. I actually thought I was buying a ticket to the sequel of The Good Guys Always Win. No worries, it was even better the second time. And the hearty audience of macho guys scattered around the little cinema made it even more fun. They laughed at everything Joe Don Baker said, including his terrific curtain line that brought the little house down.
There's gonna be a bitch getting out of here.
Oh, yeah. Hero, the good guys always win.
You're a damn